The city of Hartford, Connecticut has many architectural gems and great historic landscapes, from the grandeur of the state capitol building and neighboring Bushnell Park to the colonial-era significance of the ancient burial ground and the insurance legacy represented by nearby Travelers Tower. Beyond downtown, there are numerous other examples of such landmarks throughout the city, including in the north end of Hartford, where significant sites like Keeney Park, the Hartford Circus Fire Memorial, and many historic synagogue buildings remind us of Hartford's past and continue to enrich its present. There are also many notable landmarks along Main Street, north of the intersection with Albany Avenue, all the way up to the city line with the Town of Windsor. Hi, this is History with me, Dan Sterner. Please hit the subscribe button as we discover 14 historic treasures along this section of Main Street, and we'll take note of a few lost landmarks as well. Starting from the busy intersection of Main with Albany Avenue, Ann, High, and Eli Streets, we'll use a section of the 1877 bird's eye view of Hartford as our guide as we head north up Main Street. Our first landmark is at the southwest corner of Main and Belden Streets. Back in 1877, a house stood here, set back from Main with a long front yard. Known as the Rowley House, it was built sometime before the start of the American Revolution and was once owned by Major Michael Olcott, a commander of the 1st Company Governor's Foot Guard, who died in 1810. Warren Rowley bought the house in 1850, and 60 years later, his son sold it to the city of Hartford, which soon erected a fire station that is still home to Engine Company No. 2 and Ladder Company No. 3 today. This building, our first landmark, was designed by architect Russell F. Baker in the Renaissance Revival style. The station's original projecting cornice supported by brackets was later removed, and of course the building has been adapted from the days of horse-drawn equipment to handle modern apparatus. But in many ways it remains much as it did when it first opened in 1910. Our second landmark is just north of the fire station, on the northwest corner of Main and Belden Streets. Another old house stood here back in 1877, but it was torn down and replaced by the apartment building called the Belden, which was designed by the firm of Bailey and Goodrich and opened in 1898. By January 1980, the building was in a dilapidated condition when it was devastated by a fire that killed 4 people. The north section of the Belden was lost, but the remainder was restored and partially rebuilt in 1983. Just west of the Belden Apartments is our third landmark, a house on Belden Street built in 1879 for seed dealer Samuel F. Cadwell. The house, which remained in his family until 1967, has been called the Mark Twain House of the North End because it has elaborate patterned brickwork like the famous author's Hartford home. At one time, across the street from the Belden was an even larger apartment building. Erected in about 1904, it was called Highland Court, and later the Milner Hotel, Chapel Hotel, Hotel Kimberly, and finally the new Highland Court. In 1964, the building was ordered to be vacated by city officials, and the following year it was taken down by its owner, who preferred to demolish it than to spend $250,000 to make repairs that would satisfy the city. The North End Gateway Apartments are on the site of the old Highland Court today. Moving further north, the block on the east side of Main Street, from the place where Canton Street once intersected with Main up to Pavilion Street, was the location of several significant buildings. At the corner of Pavilion Street was the old State Arsenal, which was here from 1812 until the new State Armory at Capitol Avenue and Broad Street opened in 1909. A one-story commercial block is at this corner today. Towards the south end of the block were the city's old Arsenal School District buildings. This picture shows a 3-story commercial building that once stood at the corner of Canton and Main Streets. Just north of it was the Arsenal Public School, which was a campus of buildings erected between 1866 and 1911. Today, these buildings are the site of the Sand School. Of the row of buildings that stood along this block back in 1877, surprisingly, there are two that remain today. Our fourth landmark is the Widows' Homes, two 3-story brick apartment buildings erected in 1864-5 for charitable purposes. They were funded by local Congregational churches to house Civil War widows in a setting that, according to a report of the State Board of Charities, was a place where they could enjoy a degree of home-like privacy not found in a large institution. This photo shows the Sand School and the Widows' Homes on the right. Across the street is the Old North Cemetery, which is our fifth Main Street landmark. This photo shows the same area 100 years ago. The cemetery had a lot more trees. The brick commercial building on the southwest corner of Main and Mather Streets is long gone. Old North Cemetery was opened in 1807 when the ancient burying ground in downtown Hartford had become overcrowded. Many prominent citizens of Hartford and notable individuals originally from Hartford are buried here, including Frederick Law Olmsted Sr. and Jr., Reverend Horace Bushnell, Daniel Wadsworth, who established the Wadsworth Athenaeum, David Watkinson, who established the Watkinson Library and the Watkinson School, Dr. Mason Cogswell, who was instrumental in founding the American School for the Deaf, and his daughter Alice, who was the school's first enrolled student. Also buried here are former Connecticut governors Joseph Trumbull and William Wolcott Ellsworth. Also, Samuel Colt's brother John, Harriet Beecher Stowe's sister Mary, and her husband lawyer Thomas Clapp Perkins, and James Harmon Ward, who was one of the founders of the U.S. Naval Academy and was the first Navy officer who was killed during the Civil War. There are other veterans of the Civil War, including many who served in all-black regiments such as the 29th Connecticut. The 1877 bird's eye view doesn't indicate cemeteries. Just north of Old North Cemetery and across the street from the old Arsenal site is our sixth landmark. It was built in 1871 as the Memorial Church of St. Thomas, an Episcopal church built in honor of Bishop Thomas Church Brownell. Since 1925, it has been home to a black congregation, Union Baptist Church. Back in 1877, there were a number of houses north of the church on the west side of Main Street. One of these, our seventh landmark, was built by farmer William Mather between 1835 and 1843 and still exists today. Developer Frederick Mall later purchased the Mather Farm, and in 1893 he opened Mall Avenue, which intersects with Main Street just south of the house. In 1926, the building was modified to become the home of Tiferes Israel, an Orthodox Jewish congregation. The rounded projection on the building's east side was added to be an ark to hold Torah scrolls. The congregation later moved to Blue Hills Avenue and then to Bloomfield. It merged with Congregation Beth David in West Hartford in 1993. Since 1954, the building has been an African-American Masonic temple, Excelsior Lodge No. 3. The building's original columned front porch has been enclosed. Our eighth landmark is another building that had a similar history of being a private residence that was later remodeled, first by members of the Jewish community and then by members of the black community. Located just north of the old Mather Homestead, it was erected as a house in about 1890. In 1911, the Aaron Club, a Jewish social club, purchased the house. Within a short time, the club had expanded the building, adding additional rooms that included a large hall and bowling alleys. Declining membership and a desire to move to a facility that would be less expensive to maintain led the club to sell the building in 1918 to the Labor Educational Alliance, which was comprised of several Jewish-led socialist organizations. These included several branches of the Workmen's Circle, known in Yiddish as der Arbeiter Ring, which was founded in New York in 1900 by immigrants from Eastern Europe as a mutual aid society. The building on Main Street was renamed the Labor Lyceum. Westward, down Mall Avenue, now called F.D. Oates Avenue, on the north side, near the intersection with Garden Street, there are several Jewish cemeteries, one of which is for Workmen's Circle Branch 184 and another for Branch 936. In 1929, dissension broke out between the socialists and communists within the Labor Educational Alliance. The result was that the communist organizations were expelled, and in 1931 the socialist Workmen's Circle groups secured control of the building. They owned it for the next 20 years, selling it in 1951 to a black church, Bethel A.M.E. In the mid-1960s, the Congregation expanded the building to plans by architect Frank Bayek of Wethersfield, which included a new Gothic-inspired facade. Bethel A.M.E. moved to Bloomfield in the 1990s. Today, the building is Gospel Lighthouse Apostolic Church. If you are enjoying this video, please remember to hit subscribe. In the same vicinity, just a few steps further up Main Street, there are two other historic churches, Faith Congregational and Metropolitan A.M.E. Zion, which are the 9th and 10th landmarks on our list. First, on the east side of Main, is a Romanesque Revival and High Victorian Gothic-style building designed by Samuel J.F. Thayer of Boston. It was erected as the Windsor Avenue Congregational Church in 1871. From the late 19th century into the 1920s, Main Street north of Albany Avenue was called Windsor Avenue. One of the pastors of this church, from 1883 to 1890, was Charles E. Stowe, son of the anti-slavery novelist Harriet Beecher Stowe. In 1953, the Windsor Avenue congregation merged with the Fourth Congregational Church and sold its Main Street building to Faith Congregational Church, which had formed that same year as a merger of the city's oldest black church, Talcott Street Congregational, and Mother Bethel Methodist Church. The Talcott Street Church had started back in 1826 as the African Religious Society at the corner of Talcott and Market Streets. Across the street from Faith Congregational Church, on the west side of Main, is a church originally built as the North Methodist Church. Designed by E.H. Waters, work on the building began in 1873, but because of a depression following the financial panic of that year, the church was not fully completed until 1886. In 1919, the parish began work on a new church building on Albany Avenue, and the Main Street building became Emmanuel Synagogue. In 1926, Emmanuel began work on its own new building on Greenfield Street. It sold the Main Street building to Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. This black congregation originally split from the Talcott Street Church in 1833 and had its first building on Elm Street before moving to Pearl Street, where it was located for many years. Just south of Metropolitan A.M.E. Zion Church and directly across the street from Faith Congregational Church is the driveway that leads to Spring Grove Cemetery, our 11th landmark. This private cemetery, which is over 34 acres, was established in 1845. It's still in use today, but as noted in some recent news stories, it's currently in disrepair due to lack of funding. Over 100 Civil War veterans are buried here, as well as many other notable individuals, including the Hartford-born painter Frederick Edwin Church, the poet Lydia Huntley Sigourney, who was known as the Sweet Singer of Hartford, Laurent Clerk, the renowned deaf educator who was one of the founders of the American School for the Deaf, the songwriter Henry Clay Work, William Henry Jacklin, who was Hartford's first black firefighter, and Elizabeth Aldrich Pond, whose husband Charles M. Pond bequeathed to the city the land for Elizabeth Park, which was named in her honor. The Allen Memorial Chapel, erected in 1884, once stood in the cemetery, but it was destroyed after being hit by lightning in 1904. Moving further north on Main Street, we come to one of the area's oldest businesses, Star Hardware, which finally closed in 2023 after over 100 years in business because of repeated flooding from the overflowing of a nearby retaining pond. Hyman Gillen started the business in 1916 on Front Street in the heart of Hartford's Old East Side. In the late 1950s, the neighborhood was slated for redevelopment, and Star Hardware moved north to 2995 Main Street, where it celebrated its opening with a week-long home modernizing festival in February 1960. In 1993, later owner Max Kothari, in the aftermath of the recession of 1989, reduced the size of the store, which once occupied its entire 16,000 square foot building. 30 years later, it was not the economy, but overflowing sewage water that would force the store to close. Moving north, our 13th landmark is the former Fuller Brush Factory, which is currently undergoing a $42.6 million redevelopment into apartments to be called Bristle and Main. Constructed in 1922-3, the massive complex was touted as the largest household brush factory in the world. The Fuller Brush Company was established in Hartford in 1906 by Alfred C. Fuller, a native of Nova Scotia, Canada. With a focus on door-to-door sales, reflected in the title of his 1960 memoir, A Foot in the Door, he grew his business into a multi-million-dollar company and made the Fuller Brush Man an iconic figure throughout the country. Tragedy struck during the construction of the factory's front tower. On March 31, 1923, a 56,000-gallon water tank dropped through 4 concrete floors, causing a collapse of the tower that killed 10 people. Rescue efforts were initially hampered because the tower's roof and parts of its upper section had survived and were dangling precariously. After heavy cables failed to pull down the roof, dynamite had to be used before rescue workers could return to the 30-foot pile of debris. The tower was rebuilt and still stands today over a century later. North of the Fuller Brush Factory, Main Street crosses into the town of Windsor and becomes Windsor Avenue. This is a section of Windsor that extends south into Hartford. Just to the east is a small neighborhood that is part of Hartford. The Hartford-Windsor border passes right through a property on the south side of Violet Street, which will count as our 14th and final landmark. The house is notable because it seems to be the second oldest building to survive in the city of Hartford. It was erected by Hezekiah Marsh for his son, John Marsh, in 1783, just a year after the Butler McCook House downtown. So we end our trip up Main Street with the oldest of our 14 landmarks. These great places document the changes this section of Hartford has experienced over the last 2.5 centuries. From the days when it was mostly farmland and provided the space for the state arsenal and large cemeteries, through the growth of business and industry, and finally to current redevelopment efforts. These buildings also reflect demographic changes, as buildings erected by white Protestants were later used by Jewish immigrants and then the black community. Please remember to hit the like button and check out some of my other videos about historic Hartford, Connecticut. Thanks for watching.